The galaxy is about to witness a power it never dared to imagine. These words echoed through the corridors of Helio Station as Captain Sayla Draken observed the three-dimensional map projected before her. The war ravaging the central sectors had already consumed entire civilizations, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Now, all hope rested on an improbable and enigmatic alliance. But why had the Terran Command, renowned for its calculated neutrality, chosen to intervene now? And what could they bring to the war that even the most powerful intergalactic armies had failed to achieve? The answer was as simple as it was terrifying: they had never revealed their true hand. For years, while chaos reigned, humanity prepared in silence, developing weapons and strategies beyond imagination. In the war room, the commanders of the interplanetary coalition watched in shock as a relatively small Terran fleet entered the battlefield. There were no massive cruisers or gigantic armed platforms. Instead, it was a compact force of swift frigates and stealth destroyers. This is the force they call decisive, murmured Commander Zarek of the Xynarian Empire, unable to hide his skepticism. But when the first shots were fired, skepticism gave way to pure astonishment. The human ships moved like predators, dancing across the battlefield with surgical precision. Each attack seemed to dismantle the enemy line with methodical efficiency. Sayla, her eyes fixed on the screen, whispered, "They're not just fighting, they're dominating." As the reports came in, it became clear that the humans were playing a game no one else understood. What began as doubt quickly transformed into certainty: something much larger was driving this unexpected offensive. The tension was palpable in the Stellar Alliance command room. General Rither stared at the holographic screen, his expression oscillating between disbelief and fascination. This isn't a battle. It's a calculated execution," he murmured, his voice carrying a mix of admiration and distrust. The human forces were dismantling the enemy's defensive lines with terrifying precision. As the Terran ships advanced, the Vyrnax defense systems, once deemed impenetrable, became useless. Every human maneuver seemed to predict the adversary's next move with unnerving accuracy. How do they know exactly where to strike? Who are these strategists? One officer asked aloud, her voice echoing through the room, but there was no answer. Human tactics were unlike anything ever seen. There were no brute force assaults, so common in intergalactic wars. Instead, the Terrans employed near-artistic maneuvers, disabling critical systems and leaving the Vyrnax adrift like vulnerable prey in the void of space. "This is more than strategy," Rither remarked. "It's as if they've studied every weakness, every flaw in the Vyrnax battle doctrines." Minutes turned into an hour. The silence in the room was almost oppressive. Holographic projections showed the Vyrnax forces being systematically obliterated, sector by sector. With each update, the scale of the human impact became clearer. "Delta Sector has fallen," an officer announced in disbelief. "No losses reported." "Unacceptable," exclaimed Counselor Reinach, slamming the command table. "How is it possible that they haven't lost a single ship?" But deep down, he knew he was witnessing something unprecedented. On the hologram, the last bastion of Gamma Sector disappeared. The human forces weren't just winning, they were rewriting the logic of war. As Rither gazed at the desolate remains of the enemy lines, he realized this battle wasn't just a victory. It was a message. And it was being heard across the galaxy. Want to know how humanity turned war into science and achieved the impossible in just a few hours? Stay with us as we uncover the secrets behind this relentless strategy that forever changed the course of the galaxy. You're about to discover the true power of the human mind. The human fleet advanced with a precision that seemed to defy conventional understanding. Their ships moved with disconcerting agility, while the remnants of Vyrnax defenses turned into incandescent debris. There was no hesitation, only calculated motion that made it clear humanity was playing a completely different game. How is this possible? What have they been doing all these years? Rither muttered, his voice laden with frustration and disbelief. Before anyone could respond, a figure entered the room. A human officer, clad in a simple uniform with eyes that seemed to pierce through every soul present, spoke with cold detachment. We prepared. Prepared for what? Rither questioned, his voice a mixture of anger and suspicion. The human officer took a step forward, his gaze fixed and calculated. You call this war, he began, emotionless. For us, it's an exercise. A test of adaptability. The statement left the room in silence. The commanders exchanged uneasy glances. It wasn't arrogance, it was a chillingly clear assertion. Rither, struggling to contain his confusion, asked, "And what is the objective of all this?" "To end this conflict as efficiently as possible," the human replied bluntly. "We waited because we needed you to be ready to understand our methods." On the central hologram, Vyrnax territories fell one after another, with little to no resistance. The human forces advanced as if every step had been calculated with mathematical precision. If you hadn't been ready, the officer continued, this war would have ended long ago. Rither looked at the hologram, where the Vyrnax core territory was about to be breached. For the first time, he wondered, what kind of war had humanity been waging in secret? The answer seemed to be there, but could he accept it? The human fleet wasn't merely fighting, it was dissecting its enemies, eliminating every weak point with unnerving precision. "Report," barked Admiral Orlek, breaking the tense silence in the command room. "What's the status of the Vyrnax Central Fortress?" The tactical officers worked feverishly, their hands trembling as they processed the data flooding in. "The Central Fortress is failing, sir," one analyst finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The humans have neutralized the main shield systems and are deploying boarding pods as we speak." General Rither felt a chill run down his spine. The Central Fortress, thought to be invulnerable and protected by layers of defenses that had repelled the coalition for years, was now collapsing like fragile glass under immense pressure. "Boarding pods?" Rither asked in disbelief. "They're going inside?" The human officer standing nearby nodded slightly, his tone detached. "Yes. Surgical attacks are far more effective than brute force," he said calmly. "Our objective isn't annihilation. It's control." The room fell silent again, the gravity of the statement sinking in. The human tactics weren't driven by passion or desperation, they were cold, calculated, and terrifyingly efficient. "How are they achieving this?" murmured one coalition commander. "We've fought the Vyrnax for years and barely made a dent in their defenses. And now?" "Training," the human officer replied, his voice steady and unwavering. "We prepared for scenarios like this long before we encountered the Vyrnax. Space warfare, ground combat, electronic countermeasures, it's all part of our doctrine." "Doctrine?" Rither repeated, the weight of the word pressing on him. "You mean you expected this?" "Not expected," the human corrected, his gaze fixed on the holographic display. "But we were prepared. Always prepared." The response hit the coalition officers like a hammer. For humanity, war wasn't a possibility, it was an inevitability. As the hologram updated, showing the Vyrnax forces retreating to a more fortified sector, Admiral Orlek muttered bitterly, "Let me guess, the humans anticipated this, too." "Of course," the human officer replied without hesitation. "We'll let them retreat for now. It's an old tactic. Drive them to their final refuge, where they believe they are safe. And then, take even that from them." The human officer's words echoed through the command room. General Rither could barely believe what he was hearing. "You're toying with them?" he asked incredulously. "Toying? No." The human's voice was cold and devoid of emotion. "We are ensuring that when they fall completely. No chance for recovery. No opportunity to regroup." Rither turned his eyes back to the hologram. The Vyrnax fleet was retreating chaotically to their most fortified bastions, clearly terrified. The disarray was a testament to how human tactics had not only broken their defenses but also shattered their understanding of warfare itself. This wasn't a conflict governed by rules, it was one ruled by sheer precision. "Reports from ground operations are coming in," announced an officer, his face pale. "Human soldiers have already deployed to key Vyrnax planets." Admiral Orlek let out a bitter laugh. "How are they launching ground assaults? We've barely secured orbital supremacy." "Parallel operations," the human officer said, crossing his arms as he studied the map. "While dismantling the enemy fleet, ground units seize critical points. We train to operate on multiple fronts simultaneously." Rither felt the weight of this revelation settle on him. The coalition forces had always struggled to balance space and ground combat, but the humans seemed to master both with effortless coordination. "Reports indicate that the Vyrnax planetary defenses have been neutralized. Minimal resistance," the officer continued. "Impossible," someone muttered in disbelief. "Those planets are fortresses." "What kind of soldiers are these?" Rither finally asked. The human officer replied simply, "Adaptable. Trained not just to fight, but to think, analyze, and adapt in real time." The room fell silent again. For humanity, war wasn't just combat, it was a science, an art of precision and strategy. "And what's the next move?" Rither asked, his voice hesitant. "We'll let the remaining fleet retreat," the human explained. "Then we'll cut off all escape routes. Once isolated, they'll have two choices, surrender or total destruction." "So, that's it?" Merrick asked, his eyes fixed on the holographic display. "They're already anticipating the endgame?" The human officer allowed a faint smile to cross his face, the closest he'd shown to emotion. "Anticipating? No," he corrected calmly. "They're executing." The command room fell silent. Coalition commanders exchanged uneasy glances, not at the technology or tactics of humanity, but at the mindset behind them. The humans approached war like an equation, every variable studied, every outcome meticulously calculated. The holographic display revealed more Vyrnax worlds falling, extinguished like stars disappearing into the void. The Vyrnax's final fortress loomed large on the map, its imposing command ship once a symbol of absolute power. Now it seemed small, fragile, surrounded by relentless human forces. There was no swarm of disorganized ships, only precise, unyielding formations. "What happens if the Vyrnax surrender?" Rither ventured, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then they live," the human officer replied without hesitation. "We don't fight to exterminate. We fight to win and to ensure that no one ever considers challenging us again." Rither felt a chill run through him. It was cold logic, but undeniably effective. Humanity wasn't just winning, they were redefining the very meaning of victory. As the hologram detailed the final stages of the offensive, it became clear that the Vyrnax were out of options. Their flagship, once an unbreakable fortress, now looked like a shadow of its former power, its systems crippled, its escorts obliterated. "The human fleet is closing in on the flagship," a tactical officer reported, his voice trembling. "They've blocked every route of escape." "Any Vyrnax reinforcements?" Rither asked, already dreading the answer. "None, sir," the officer confirmed, shaking his head. "The humans have already eliminated their supply lines and reserve forces. It's over. They have nowhere left to run." The silence in the room was deafening. The impossible had become inevitable, and humanity was in absolute control. Dalen watched as the human ships completed their calculated encirclement of the Vyrnax flagship. There were no grand speeches, no unnecessary displays of power. Just a meticulously executed formation, a silent reminder that resistance was futile. The message was clear: there is no escape. The human officer stood motionless, his presence almost as imposing as the fleet he commanded. "We've transmitted the terms of surrender," he announced, his voice as cold as the void of space. "The Vyrnax have 5 minutes to respond. If they refuse, we will proceed with final neutralization." Darius, visibly disturbed, broke the silence. "And if they don't accept? You'll just eliminate them?" The question hung heavy in the air, but the human officer didn't hesitate. "If they choose rejection, yes," he replied with calm finality. "Our goal is resolution, not wanton destruction. An end so decisive that no similar conflict can ever arise again." Those words weighed heavily on Dalen. He realized humanity wasn't fighting for glory, nor for a conventional victory. For them, war was a tool to shape the galaxy, erasing resistance with unrelenting precision. There was no room for ambiguity, only efficiency and finality. "The flagship is responding," announced the tactical officer, his voice shaking. They're requesting terms." A murmur of disbelief swept through the room. After years of battle and devastation, could the war truly be ending? "Put it on screen," Dalen ordered, struggling to mask the turmoil of emotions consuming him. The hologram shifted to reveal the bridge of the Vyrnax flagship. Their commander appeared, his once proud posture now marked by fear and resignation. "State your terms, humans," he demanded, his voice trembling. "But know this, you won through manipulation, not strength." The human officer stepped forward, his expression unchanging. "You lost because you clung to outdated doctrines. We offered peace before this, and you refused. Now, you face the consequences of your choices." The words landed like a final verdict, devoid of malice but heavy with meaning. The Vyrnax commander hesitated, the tension in his eyes growing. For a moment, it seemed he might reject the terms. But as he looked at his crew and the unforgiving reality around him, he lowered his head. "Very well," he murmured. "We surrender." The impact of those words reverberated through the command room. After years of war and countless losses, the impossible had happened. Yet as silence filled the room, Dalen felt this wasn't truly the end. Something larger was unfolding, something that would forever alter the galaxy's balance. It was over. No ceremonies, no grandeur, just a silent collapse after years of conflict. The impossible had happened, the Vyrnax, an indomitable force for generations, surrendered within hours. Tarion stared at the hologram, unable to believe what he was witnessing. The forces that had resisted for so long were now silenced, their banners lowered. "Confirmation received," the tactical officer announced, his voice still tinged with shock. "The Vyrnax have ordered all remaining military operations to cease. It's official. The war is over." The human officer stepped forward, his tone as calm as ever. "Our ships will begin the stabilization process across Vyrnax systems. Coalition forces are free to return to their respective territories." His words, direct and emotionless, felt like an epitaph for the conflict. Tarion tried to speak, but the weight of the moment silenced him. A war that had consumed countless lives and resources ended not in a drawn-out battle, but in a surgical execution lasting mere hours. "How?" he finally managed to ask, his voice barely audible. "How were you prepared for something like this?" The human officer met his gaze, his expression inscrutable. "We come from a world where conflict is inherent to survival," he explained. "We learn to adapt, to innovate, and to eliminate threats decisively. For us, war isn't an objective, it's a means. A path to a peace no one would dare to break." The words reverberated through the room. It wasn't just humanity's strength that set them apart, but their understanding of conflict itself. They had transcended war, turning it into a science. Tarion watched the hologram as human ships repositioned themselves. There were no celebrations, no speeches, no fanfare. Only methodical movements toward stabilization and reconstruction. Humanity wasn't a conquering force. They were architects of a new order. In their brutal efficiency, they had rewritten the rules of war, forging a path to a peace that had once seemed impossible. For the first time in years, Tarion felt hope tempered by a thin thread of fear. The galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had shown it was not only capable of winning but of shaping the future. And in their calculated precision, they had proven that victory was never about who fought the longest but about who understood how to fight best. And so, humanity didn't just win a war, they redefined the very meaning of victory. In a universe marked by conflict, they proved that true strength lies not in weapons, but in intelligence and adaptability. What will the galaxy's future hold now that the impossible has been achieved? One thing is certain. Humanity's legacy will be remembered as the moment war became an art and peace a certainty.